Hi everyone. Today let's talk about Jerome Powell's second day of comments. Then we'll get into all the usual data and charts. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and hit the bell to help out the channel. So let's get started. Jerome Powell said they are not far from cutting rates, which is interesting. They say they think they're in the right place right now, but they are not far from cutting rates. That's a little bit more dovish than the commentary that we saw yesterday. We commented on that yesterday. It really was right along the party line relative to what the Fed has been saying. Strong economy, strong jobs market, nothing crazy. And then he said today that they're not that far from cutting rates. He said he thinks they're going to cut 3 times in yesterday's testimony. And really that was the big takeaway from today. Nothing crazy beyond that. And we'll see how the markets react after the jobs data tomorrow. Moving over to fear and greed, we did step up slightly here to a 75 from 73, and really there were no changes across the rest of the indicators. Still extreme greed here for the top two, breadth still hovering in regular greed but trending up slowly, and then put call ratio, extreme greed, VIX pulling back slightly but still a little bit elevated, safe haven demand, regular greed, and then junk bond demand continues to hover in this same area in extreme greed. Moving over to seasonality, you can see here for the 7th, we were expecting down move. I talked about it yesterday, and I thought maybe this move had kind of culminated. We did see a big down move yesterday, and then today we saw a bit of a rally, and then sideways chop into the middle of the month. Based on regular years. If we are going to follow that election year path, then we should be looking for lower lows. So that could be interesting. So if we've kind of satisfied this initial dip, we saw the rally here today. We could see fall tomorrow and a little bit more fall into next week, eventually bottoming out around the middle of the month, and then sideways chop into the end of the month or slight bullishness. And then for historical days, don't forget Friday is expected to be slightly bearish. And based on the price action that we're seeing after hours today, it seems likely that that is what's going to happen. Moving over to the economic calendar, we did get the ECB interest rate decision. That stayed flat as expected. Initial jobless claims as expected as well. Nothing super convincing. Still waiting on that Fed balance sheet number as of this recording. We'll comment on it tomorrow. And then looking at tomorrow's data, GDP for the Eurozone, non-farm payrolls, obviously the big one, as well as the unemployment rate coming out at 8:30. Based on the price action after hours, it seems like those might be a little bit elevated, but who knows? Bad news could be good news at this point. If we see weak employment data, that could spur some interest rate cuts a little bit sooner, but bad news for the economy is still bad news eventually, so keep that in mind. Current expectation 3.7%, not moving from the previous read, and then non-farm payrolls here at just about 200,000. Moving over to max pain, remember it's down around that 507 to 508 area. I thought we would probably finish below 510, and then we ended up getting a spike higher here today. Again, with the after hours price action, maybe 510 is still possible. That would be down a little bit less than 1%. And obviously the data tomorrow could absolutely move markets more than that. Top of the puts up at 517, kind of this mid-range here, right where we are. And then that first call strike at 510. So certainly interesting, expecting to hold well above 500, but 510 seems like that point where we could head towards tomorrow. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&Ps, you can see I added a level here at 513.29. That is the high from Friday, the 1st of March. Over through that level and then pulled back, and now we are testing that level here again after hours. Through the session, we pushed through it, no issues, tested it after hours, and we bounced a little bit. Momentum ticking towards bearish, RSI breaking down a little bit on the shorter time frames. Expecting a little bit of pullback into that news release tomorrow. Otherwise, on the longer time frames, no changes. We got a new high closed as well as a new wick high, so everything in terms of structure still looks bullish. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish. On the daily time frames, just showing a little bit of weakness on the hourly. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see that third ATR band currently sitting at 517.86. We didn't quite get that high, but we did get close to that zone and then reject a little bit after hours. Again, volume weighted moving average still ticking back towards bullish. It was bullish yesterday and it is continuing to be bullish. We have not seen any volume spikes either, so nothing saying that this cannot continue to melt higher. That would be your resistance though, 517.80 up to 518. 415 in that range. And then looking at the hourly chart, not super surprising that we saw a little bit of a pullback at the end of the session. You can see we overthrew that third ATR band, grinded along that level, got all the way up to the wick highs of 515.86, overthrowing the band, and then pulled back almost down to that first ATR band off of the midline, again showing a little bit of weakness. And you can see the spike in volume for the day was on that bearish candle, so slight pullbacks, nothing convincing, but it makes sense. We were just overbought on the day, and you can see that we pulled back slightly. Moving over to the NASDAQ here on the hourly and the daily, you can see we did test that high going back to Friday the 1st on the NASDAQ, and this was an all-time high here for the wick. We got up to 446.72, so we beat it by around 20 cents or so, and then on a closing basis, we were right at the same level, if not a little bit lower. I don't think we actually closed above it, so pulling back from that midline, you can see the trend resistance got into that zone, started to pull back. Didn't quite test it, you can see on the hourly chart, but look at this wick down that we saw after hours. Got all the way down into the 442 area and then bounced back up to 443.90, so that's a little bit reassuring, but you can see momentum definitely ticking towards bearish. RSI breaking below the SMA. Similarly to the SPY, you can see structurally on the longer time frames, definitely still bullish. Momentum ticking towards bullish, RSI breaking higher. Everything looks good still on the medium time frames, but that shorter time frame showing just a little bit of weakness. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see similar thesis, still above all the EMAs and SMAs on the hourly. Structurally still good, got almost up to that second ATR band, sitting at 447.11, ended up pulling back from that level, tested it and then pulled back. And then on that third ATR band that is currently sitting at 452.80, that would be your upper resistance. If we did get a second day continuation and a break higher, certainly possible. Volume weighted MACD says bullish, nothing convincing on the relative volume. And then looking at that hourly chart, pretty much the same thesis. You can see that double top clearly, hit that third ATR band, found some resistance, pulled back to the 21 and almost to that midline, found a little bit of support. You can see the volume coming through on that bearish candle the same way it did on the SPY. So back into the mid-range, found a little bit of a bounce. We'll see what happens tomorrow with the data. Obviously, earnings is going to push the markets around and we'll see what happens. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, I spent some time trying to figure out what the Russell's been doing here. It really looks pretty choppy, but this overall structure does look a bit like a rising wedge, so keep that in mind. If we find resistance here around that 208.60 area, just like we kind of did already at this 208.22 area, that could be a big indicator of bearishness. But if it does break out of there, it could absolutely go higher. 212.10 would be my next level. Currently, momentum and RSI are both bullish, so keep that in mind. This is typically a bearish structure eventually, but right now we're in the bullish portion of it. And then looking at the Dow, again, tried to do a little bit of structure forming in the shorter time frames. Long term, obviously, it's still very bullish, but we've been finding some consolidation, finding slightly higher lows here recently. Momentum stepped up. The Dow has not been moving a whole lot. It was up a little bit today, 0.33, still holding that 21 EMA. Let's see if we can find anything here on the hourly. Slowly trending down with some lower highs each time, finding resistance at that 144 EMA, trading at 389.39. So that would be your resistance. Really choppy on the session, selling off after hours like everything else. Momentum slightly bearish, RSI slightly bearish on the short time frames. Let's look at it here on the 12-hour. And similarly here on the 12-hour, you can see it rejected from that 21 EMA at 389.37. That could be interesting. It's also below the 9 and 21s on a closing basis, as well as VWAP, so that's slightly bearish. Momentum did find a little bit of strength today, but it is finding resistance, so a bunch of mixed signals on the Dow, nothing convincing. Moving over to the equal weighted S&Ps. We don't talk about this one every day, but here today it's a special occasion. We got a breakout of our previous high. You can see 164.87 was that level going back to January of 22. It's been a pretty steady run here for a couple of weeks. New high, breakout, up after hours, and you can see it here on the daily chart. Gapped right through that level, ended up bullish on the day, held most of those gains, 0.78%. And then let's look at it on the hourly. You can see that gap right through the level, held, made higher highs, and after hours, super bullish. So everything looks good on the equal weighted S&Ps, and it is good to see the overall market participating in this rally a little bit more. even though tech has been actually lagging a little bit with the NASDAQ holding the same highs, while the SPY and the equal weights make new highs. Moving over to the Mag 7, the Mag 7 had a great day, 2.91% momentum bullish, RSI bullish, everything looks good here. We talked about holding above this previous trend line, it's done it for a couple of days, and now it's definitely broken higher. That's a new all-time high for the Mag 7. Trend resistance up around 385. Went ahead and added a little bit of structure here. You can see this is an interesting level. We've been grinding along that level for a while. Did hit some resistance, and it is selling just a little bit after hours, so keep that in mind. Broke the longer term trend line, hitting a little bit of a short term resistance, but everything still looks bullish. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. Apple has been on a burner to the downside, and we talked about it a couple of days ago, how it is oversold for sure. You can see on the RSI, it's down to a 22, super oversold. It's way below the ATR bands as well. So on the Tasty charts, definitely oversold. Momentum still bearish, and it was bearish on the day, 0.07, but it's hanging in there now. It's down a little bit after hours. Realistically, I am still watching for this low here from 26 October. That's at 165.71 level. If we get there, show some consolidation, that could be an interesting zone. Again, this is still Apple. I don't expect it to go to zero or anything crazy like that. But in terms of structure, absolutely bearish, falling knife, waiting for some structure, waiting for some basing to see what happens. And then looking at Tesla, actually turned a positive day, got back above the 177.70 level, so that's critical. Closed below it yesterday, that was concerning. Tested the low from yesterday and then ended up holding. Let's go ahead and zoom in on that. And you can see what I mean here. The low of day was on that first candle, tried to bounce, hit the 21, tested it in the pre-market, rallied from that level, got back above the 21, tested the 21 mid-session, and then rallied into the end, and then sold off a little bit just like everything else in the after hours. So still holding 177.70. If it's going to hold, you want it to hold at that level. And if it does, that could give you some opportunity up to 188.80. But obviously in terms of trend, still very much a downtrend. Moving over to Broadcom and NVIDIA, two of the top performers on the day, 4.22 and 4.47%. Momentum super bullish. It is worth noting that they are both down a little bit after hours. Broadcom a little bit more than NVIDIA. You can see Broadcom actually down quite a bit. Let's look at that on the hourly. You can see that massive selling here. Got all the way down to the level at 1281. So that's pretty interesting. Big wick low. Maybe there was a news event that I'm not tracking, but I have not seen any news events, and it was a positive day. Definitely not an all-time high or anything for Broadcom, but it's been on a run. You can see it here. And it was very strong on the day and then found some selling. NVIDIA, again, new all-time highs, big breakout, got above that trend line that we were watching, so it makes sense. Gap to the level, rallied up. Next possible resistance would be 980 or so, but who knows? It seems like there's no resistance at this point, just continues to go up seemingly every day. Moving over to staples and discretionary. Staples had a great day, and then it gave it all back after hours. 0.57 on a closing basis, got above that trend line, looked super good. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish. And then if you look here on the hourly chart, big selling after hours, pretty interesting. We'll see if this ends up holding in tomorrow's session below that 75.40 level. So that's a break of support. So that's not great either. And then looking at discretionaries, positive day. 0.76, ended up holding that 180.10 level, closed below it yesterday, gapped to it, and then rallied almost to the penny. You can see it opened at 180.10, so exactly on the level. 180.10 opened at that level. Momentum still bearish. RSI ticking a little bit bullish, still below the 9 EMA at 182.25. So pretty interesting. I'm definitely concerned about what we're seeing here on staples. I thought this was going to continue to go higher, and it did. That first after hours candle is definitely concerning, and you can see that bearishness on the indicators after hours. So a little bit of a mixed signal going into the unemployment data tomorrow. Moving over to industrials and utilities to continue to follow this thesis. Just for a quick highlight, Broadcom did have earnings, so that's partially why they're down. And then for staples, Costco had earnings and they're sliding a little bit as well. But otherwise, industrials, positive day, looking still strong. Utilities continues this run, 0.65%, looking at that price target of 64.81. Both of these continue to look very strong and headed higher in my opinion. Moving over to breadth on the 20 and the 50-day averages, you can see the 20 continues to hold in this same area. It really has not moved. Did wick a slightly higher level here, but continued to close at that same zone that we closed at on the 4th, opened at on the 5th, tested here on the 6th, and now we are closing at that same level. So definitely consolidation, been in the same zone for a bit. 50-day on the other hand, continuing to show bullishness, momentum bullish, RSI bullish, wicked above the 55, closed pretty much right on top of it. Still looking for that 177.46 level test. Then we'll see what happens at that point. Everything on both of these still says bullish, even if it's slowly grinding higher. Looking for a test of that 86.50 level on the 20-day average. Moving over to yields, they continue to slump on the second day of comments from Jerome Powell. Like I said, he seemed a little bit more dovish in my opinion, and that makes sense with yields going lower. Let's go ahead and extend this trend line out. Give you a little bit of a price target there, 4.47. 55 EMA sitting at 4.43, momentum bearish, RSI bearish, no change to the thesis. It's been selling off and it looks like it's going to sell off more. And then similarly here on the 10-year yield, we broke through that 55 EMA. That was the critical point. Opened up at the same spot, closed lower, momentum bearish, RSI bearish. So next price target is right around that 4 level, 3.97. We'll see what happens there. But to me, this looks like it's going to continue to sell at least to that next level. Moving over to the dollar, as you would expect, the dollar went much lower on the day, more than 0.5%, so lots and lots of selling there, and you can see on the comments, went lower throughout the day, took out that next level. That was the level we were watching at 102.98, took out that. Still at the lows. Obviously session not closed yet for another 2 hours or so, but we're right here at the lows from 24 January. Does seem like it's going to head lower. Next support for me, 102.14, and then my 102 level, which is the low from these consolidations back from the beginning of January. If this continues to head lower, we should expect equities to continue to find strength. Moving over to bonds. Bonds did not move much. JNK up 0.11, still in the middle of this range. TLT also down slightly, 0.09. Pretty interesting considering that the 10-year was actually down a bit. Momentum still bullish, RSI still bullish, structure still intact. I would expect it to get above 96.50, but it didn't do it quite today. It almost got there. The high of day was 96.40, so it missed it by 10 cents. We'll see if we can get back above that level. The last time we were above it was 31 January. Seems like we're going to get there as long as yields continue to do what they're doing. Moving over to volatility, you can see it didn't really change that much. Move index sold off quite a bit. VIX did gap higher and then sold off, still hanging out pretty high in that 14.4 range, which is basically at the closing levels that we saw the last 2 days, right at that trend line, wicking the same highs, wicking the same lows, just about. Momentum still bullish, RSI still bullish, so keep that in mind. VIX still showing elevated volatility going into tomorrow's session. It'll be interesting to see how this reacts after we get the unemployment data. Could absolutely pull back from that level on the data, as long as the data is decent. If it comes back weak, then we could absolutely see a spike in the VIX, and then resistance would be up in that 16.7 area. Moving over to my accounts, I did fine, up a couple $100 on the day, about 650 or so. And then looking at my positions, no changes to this 206. That worked out quite well. I sold that for $1.33, so max profit there, 207.33. See if it can do that tomorrow. It's right in that range, 207 here after hours. And then for the calls here, I did roll up to 444. I was at 445 and then that massive selling that we saw after hours, so I did pull back a little bit to 444, and that's for $2.43 on both of those. So looking to collect about $500 on this position, and then about $240 or so on this poor man's covered call. You can see the profit on that call, definitely in the profit now, so that's good on the rally, and then continuing to try to pull in a little bit of money here on the call side. So everything's still working out, still a bullish position, not super bullish as I am right at the money, whereas yesterday I was one strike out of the money, so I don't expect to see another massive rally like we saw today, but trying to hang in there and potentially get about 0.5% of gain tomorrow. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of Jerome Powell's comments. Will markets continue to rocket higher, or will they pull back on the catalyst of earnings that we saw at the end of the session? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.